My name is Natalie. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life revolved around one mission: to win my mother's approval. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I gave up, it was never enough. Last month, at her 65th birthday dinner, my mother raised her glass, looked me straight in the eye, and made a toast that cut through me like a blade. "The best gift would be," she said with a cold smile, "if you finally left my life." Those words were not an offhand comment. They were her truth, spoken in front of a room full of family and friends. And that night, I decided to give her exactly what she wished for. Within days, I vanished. I packed my belongings, sold my house, froze our joint accounts, and walked away from everything I had ever known. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't say goodbye. I simply disappeared. And if you want to know what happened after I granted my mother's birthday wish, stay with me. Before we dive deeper into this story, share where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. This is just the beginning of a journey that will show how sometimes the people who break us most are our own family, and how karma always comes back to finish the story. I grew up in Lakeside, a small picture-perfect town in Connecticut. From the outside, our life looked idyllic: a charming Victorian house with a white picket fence, a flawless green lawn, and the reputation of being the family everyone admired. But behind those walls, I lived under the critical gaze of my mother, Catherine Wilson, a woman who demanded nothing less than perfection. To the world, Catherine was a queen, president of the Garden Club, treasurer of the Historical Society, coordinator of every charity gala worth attending. With her salon-perfect ash blonde hair, wrinkle-free designer suits, and practiced smile, she was Lakeside's most polished socialite. But that smile never reached her eyes. Especially not when she looked at me. "Natalie, stand up straight. A lady never slouches. Natalie, that dress makes you look pudgy. Change it. Why can't you be more like Andrea?" She earned straight A's again. I was barely 6 years old when these remarks began. By my teens, they had sharpened into constant reminders that I would never measure up. The only shield between us was my father, Robert Wilson. He was kind, gentle, the town doctor who always had time for everyone. After every cutting comment, he slipped quietly into my room, patting my shoulder like a bandage over a wound. "Sweetie, your mom just wants the best for you," he'd say softly, though his eyes told me he knew the truth was harsher than that. When my mother dismissed my artwork as clutter, my dad hung those paintings proudly in his office. When she skipped my school play, he was there in the front row, clapping the loudest. But when I was 16, tragedy struck. My father collapsed from a fatal heart attack. The man who had been my shield was buried under rainy skies, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother cry. It lasted only that day. Afterward, any trace of warmth in our home was gone. Without Dad to buffer her edge, Catherine's criticism grew relentless. "You're getting plump, Natalie. No man will want you if you keep eating like that." At that time, I was 5'6" and weighed 120 pounds. But in her eyes, I was never enough, and I began to believe it. Meanwhile, my older sister, Andrea, had already escaped. Off to New York for college, she became exactly what my mother wanted: a glamorous investment banker, with a successful husband, and 2 children, who seemed straight out of a magazine. Every phone call, every dinner conversation turned into a chorus of, "Did you hear? Andrea closed $1 million deal. Next summer, Andrea's taking the family to Europe." Andrea was her pride. I was an afterthought. Though I had earned a scholarship to UCLA for graphic design, a chance to build a dream career far away from Lakeside, I didn't take it. My mother began complaining of dizzy spells around that time, though doctors found nothing wrong. Guilt sank its claws into me. She had just lost my father. How could I abandon her too? So I stayed. I attended a state university, only 30 minutes from home. I traded my dreams for duty. When I graduated, I found steady work at a nearby marketing agency. The pay was all right, and it gave me freedom to check on Catherine during lunch breaks. I even bought a modest house, just 3 blocks from hers, close enough to be at her call, far enough to pretend I had independence. And so, my life became hers. For years, whenever I dated, the men were driven off, either by my mother's disapproval or her constant demands. Natalie, pick up my new prescription. The doctor changed it again. Natalie, the gutters need cleaning. You know I can't afford to hire anyone. But the truth was, she could afford it. My father had left her with more than enough savings. By 30, I was the creative director at my agency, a role I was proud of, until I told Catherine, a creative director. She scoffed. That's hardly a real executive role. Her words cut deeper than she knew. When her health worsened with arthritis, I became her full-time support system. I grocery shopped for her, sat with her at medical visits, cleaned her house, and even set up a bedroom in my home so she could stay during flare-ups. Meanwhile, Andrea breezed in for 2 visits per year, each time a celebrated guest, showered with smiles and attention, while I faded into the background, the quiet shadow, serving coffee and washing dishes. And every birthday, every holiday, I tried again. A cashmere sweater, returned. Concert tickets, unused. A luxury spa trip, rejected. My gifts, my effort, even my love, dismissed again and again. But for her 65th birthday, I planned something different, something perfect, a night that would finally prove my worth. I organized a private dinner at Bellini's, the most exclusive restaurant in town, invited her closest friends, and bought her an antique sapphire brooch I knew she secretly adored. It cost nearly $2,000, money I had been saving for a design workshop in New York. I gave up that dream, once again, hoping to win hers. I begged Andrea to come, to stand with me for once. To my surprise, she agreed. As the night drew closer, my chest filled with both hope and dread. Maybe this time, I thought, maybe tonight she would finally look at me with pride. But deep inside, I already sensed the truth. When family ties rot, love is no longer enough. And sometimes, betrayal doesn't come from strangers, but from your own mother's lips. The day of my mother's 65th birthday, I woke up determined. This year will be different, I told myself. I had poured my entire soul into planning this one evening, a celebration I believed would finally erase years of disappointment, years of criticism, years of being second best to my perfect sister Andrea. I reserved Bellini's, the most prestigious restaurant in Lakeside. I invited her closest friends from the Historical Society and Garden Club. I ordered an elegant custom cake, flavored with lemon sponge and buttercream, her old-time favorite. I even bought her a vintage sapphire and diamond brooch from the 1920s, the kind she had once admired but never bought for herself. That brooch cost me nearly $2,000, money I had been saving from my own design course in New York. Once again, I chose her over me, and my one desperate wish was that for once, she might choose me back. The morning texts began pouring in. Natalie, I hope you reminded Bellini's that I can't have garlic. Natalie, are Andrea and Thomas flying or driving? Should I pick them up? And finally, don't make this dinner too fancy. You know I prefer simple celebrations. I had already clarified her dietary restrictions with the restaurant 3 times. Andrea had told me they were driving, and the guest list was exactly 12 hand-picked friends, small and intimate. Still, her words stung. I pushed past it. I dressed carefully. A navy blue dress, classic pearls from my father, minimal makeup. I studied my smile in the mirror, rehearsing a calm composure. At 5:30, I drove to pick her up. She answered the door in her bathrobe. Mom, the reservation is for 6:15. We need to leave in 15 minutes. She smirked as her eyes swept over me. Natalie, you know I can't rush something as important as my appearance. Unlike some people. By the time she was dressed, flawless in her hair and makeup, it was already past 6:30. I called Bellini's twice to push back our slot. We arrived nearly 45 minutes late. Inside, Andrea and Thomas were already waiting with the rest of the guests in the bar. Andrea hugged Mom sweetly. Finally, we thought you'd forgotten your own birthday dinner. My mother laughed warmly, a sound I rarely heard. Blame Natalie, always late. I bit my tongue. Tonight was about her happiness, not setting the record straight. The maitre d' led us into the private dining room. White lilies and blue hydrangeas glistened under chandelier light. Each seat was marked with custom calligraphy. My mother sat proudly at the head of the table, Andrea at her right, me placed at her left. "This is absolutely lovely, Natalie," said Eleanor, my mother's old friend. But Mom wrinkled her nose. "The lilies are a bit much. Their scent will overpower the food." I caught Eleanor's sympathetic glance. My throat tightened. Dinner began. Andrea dazzled everyone with stories of her business trips to London. Thomas spoke about private schools for their children. My mother's pride radiated like a spotlight. Every time Andrea or Thomas spoke, she leaned in, laughed freely, touched their hand. When I mentioned my agency winning a big marketing campaign, she cut me short. "Natalie, would you mind signaling the waiter? My glass is empty." I nodded, swallowing the sting. Always present, always invisible. Then came dessert. The cake emerged glowing with candles. My fingers found the box with the brooch inside my purse. Maybe now, maybe when she saw it, she would smile at me. Really smile. But before I could rise, someone called out, "Speech." Mother lifted her glass. "A practiced performance. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Life has given me many blessings. My wonderful daughter, Andrea, who makes me proud every single day." She reached to squeeze Andrea's hand. "My brilliant son-in-law, Thomas, my precious grandchildren." Her smile sharpened into a blade, and she looked directly at me. "So if I could have one birthday wish, one perfect gift, it would be this. Natalie, I wish you would leave my life for good. Give me peace in my remaining years." The room froze. Knives hovered midway. Glasses stopped mid-sip. 12 pairs of eyes darted from her face to mine, then downward in shameful silence. She shrugged at their discomfort. "What? I'm just being honest. Isn't that what wisdom at this age is about? Speaking your truth." They all sat stunned. Andrea whispered, "Mother," but offered no defense. I sat motionless. My hand gripped the unopened gift so tightly that my fingers numbed. Was this really happening? My heart pounded as her voice blurred into static. "Excuse me." That was all I could say, rising on trembling legs. No one stopped me. No one reached for me. I walked out, past the linen-draped tables, past laughing strangers who had no idea my life had just imploded. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. I slid into my car, the small gift box balanced on the passenger seat. My gaze melted into nothing. At first, I felt nothing. Then a single tear struck my hand, the kind that comes not from pain, but from something deeper, the slow shattering of a soul. Years, decades, a lifetime of chasing love from a woman who could only sharpen knives. And tonight, she had delivered the final cut in front of everyone. I whispered to my reflection when I got home, "She wants me gone. Maybe it's time I give her what she asked for." And with that, a seed of something radical, something freeing, began to grow inside me. Not rebellion, not revenge, but liberation. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, making lists on a legal pad, planning, calculating, and for the first time, not dreaming about winning her approval, but about escaping it. Some wounds bleed silently, but when the wound is carved by your own mother, it doesn't just scar, it defines you, unless you choose to cut loose from it. That night, after my mother wished me out of her life, I sat at my kitchen table wide awake. There was no anger in me anymore, only a strange, icy clarity. I scribbled lists on a yellow legal pad, searching on my laptop, with a focus I hadn't felt in years. By dawn, I had a plan. The first step was cutting ties with the life I had anchored myself to for the past 3 decades. For years, I had bent, molded, and rearranged every part of myself to serve my mother. But now, I was ready to serve survival. I called into work, claiming illness, something I almost never did. Then I arranged a meeting with Barbara Lewis, an attorney I knew through a networking event. Her specialty wasn't exactly my case, but I trusted she'd guide me to the right direction. At 9:30 that morning, I sat across from her, explaining decades of emotional warfare, with the birthday dinner being the final assault. "I want to disappear," I concluded. My voice was eerily steady. "Not just move away, I mean vanish. A complete reset. I need to know what laws I must consider." Barbara leaned back, her eyes sharp with concern. "Natalie, what your mother did was cruel, but disappearing is no small step. Are you sure you don't need cooling off time first? I shook my head. I've had 32 years of cooling off. 32 years of trying to win love she will never give. I'm finished. She studied me for a long beat. Finally, she nodded. In that case, know this. Disappearing is not illegal, unless it involves evading loans, criminal charges, or child support. You are an adult. You can walk away, but you must be careful with finances, especially because of your joint accounts. She referred me to James Hoffman, an attorney specializing in estate law and financial restructuring. Then she handed me her card, with something that almost felt motherly in her voice. Whatever you decide, Natalie, I hope you find peace. Later that afternoon, I sat in Hoffman's sleek downtown office. He studied my paperwork carefully. The accounts you share with your mother worry me, he said. Yes, either of you can withdraw at will. But if you drain them, she might argue elder exploitation. Freezing, not emptying, is your safest move. My father created those accounts for her care, I explained quietly. Yet for years, I've been the only one contributing. She's used them like her personal spending bank while I footed the bills. James scribbled notes, his face unreadable. Then we'll freeze them and create a trust instead. That way, funds can only be released for her medical care and maintenance. Documented, verified. You protect yourself, and ironically, you protect her too. It sounded almost poetic. In removing myself, I would still fulfill my father's final wish, but on my terms, not hers. Within the week, my escape train was moving at full speed. I contacted a local property investor who bought houses for cash. His offer was well below what my renovated home was worth. But money wasn't my priority anymore. Time was. He promised we could close in 7 days. That was enough. I shut down my old bank accounts, then opened fresh ones at entirely new institutions, using a P.O. box address in another town. Temporary, until I was far enough away. I resigned after 13 loyal years at my marketing agency. My boss was stunned, but I offered no details, just that I was handling family matters. The hardest part, choosing what to carry with me into my disappearing act. I divided my life into piles: sell, donate, store, take. The take pile was shockingly small. My laptop, camera, a modest wardrobe, 3 books, my grandmother's quilt, and a few photographs. That was it. Everything else was either left behind or sold to strangers. A week after that dinner, I had still not heard from my mother. Andrea called twice, texted, and assumed, as always, that things would blow over. But this time, normal was dead. The night before my departure, I strolled the neighborhood streets, my sanctuary for morning run, the coffee shop where the barista knew my order by memory, the oak trees that shaded my block. Finally, I stopped outside my mother's Victorian house. I stared at the windows, remembering childhood nights, filled not with warmth, but with criticism and fear. I did not knock. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I spent the evening finalizing trust documents with James Hoffman. Now, every one of my contributions toward Mom's health and household were locked under trustee management. She would be cared for, but gone were her days of unchecked control. For Andrea, I left one thing: a letter explaining the trust, providing the trustees' details, and documenting the years of my financial support. It was my paper trail of truth, entrusted to James to deliver after I was gone. As James slid the final documents across the table, he paused. Are you certain about this? Once we execute, undoing it won't be easy. I looked into his eyes and thought of Mom's birthday wish echoing through that dining room. The best gift you can give me is leaving my life. Possession. The sapphire brooch, wrapped carefully for my mother. I had carried it for days, unsure whether to keep or discard it. But now I knew. I slipped it into a padded envelope with a note. You asked for a different gift, so I am returning this one. May you find your peace. Goodbye. I addressed and stamped it for her, then tucked it in my bag to mail on my way out. At sunrise, I signed away the house and pocketed the cashier's check. By 9:30 a.m., my car was westbound on Interstate 80. In my rearview mirror, Lakeside shrank into a dot, the town that had been both my prison and my proving ground. I had no exact destination in mind, only one direction: away. With every mile, emotions surged and receded like tides. Exhilaration at freedom, fear of the unknown, grief for the past, and a steady undercurrent of fierce resolve. By nightfall, I had crossed into Ohio. Alone in a nameless motel, I sat on the bed and quietly created a new email account under a new identity. Elaine Davis, my middle name, plus the street I grew up on. Simple, ordinary, believable. Natalie was gone. Elaine had just taken her first breath. For 6 straight days, I drove west, chasing nothing and everything at once. Miles of highway blurred past. I avoided big cities, where someone might notice me, and stuck to small towns, where nobody cared about my past. I bought gas with cash, slept in roadside motels, ate in diners, where I was just another passing traveler. By the time I reached the Pacific Northwest, I felt the pull of something I had not felt in years. Possibility. Evergreen forests, mist rolling onto rocky coastlines, waves crashing against cliffs. It called to the part of me that had been silenced under my mother's shadow for far too long. On the 7th day, I discovered Harbor Cove, a quiet coastal town hardly mentioned in guidebooks. It wasn't glamorous enough to be a tourist trap, but it had what I needed: a grocery store, a small clinic, a few shops, and cafes scattered along the shore. Ordinary, anonymous, perfect. In the window of a real estate office sat a flyer: cottage for rent, waterfront view, furnished, month-to-month lease. It felt like a sign. The cottage wasn't perfect. Its cedar siding was weather-beaten. The porch creaked beneath its weight, and its windows stuck during humid nights. But every room overlooked the bay, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt something like luxury, privacy. I signed the lease under my chosen alias, Elaine Davis. Elaine, my middle name, paired with Davis Street, the street I grew up on. Plain enough to blend in, but real enough not to feel fake. "What brings you here, Ms. Davis?" asked the property manager as I signed the paperwork. "Change of scenery," I replied, with a calmness that surprised me. "I'm a freelance graphic designer. I can work from anywhere." That was my cover story, but it was also laced with truth. I had already launched a simple website for Elaine Davis Designs, pitching for minor freelance gigs online. It wasn't much, but it was just enough to create a footprint for this new identity. The first week disappeared in a whirl of practicalities: setting up utilities, buying a handful of essentials, and finding my local refuge, a small coffee shop called Tidal Grounds, run by a no-nonsense woman named Diane. Diane was in her 50s, with streaked gray hair tied into a messy bun, and a face weathered by years of coastal wind. The kind of woman who carried stories in her eyes. "You're new here," she said on my 5th visit, sliding an Americano across the counter. I blinked. "That obvious?" She chuckled. "Harbor Cove notices new faces. But don't worry, we respect people's privacy. Plenty of folks land here when they're running from something or starting over. Nobody asks questions they don't need the answers to." Her disarming bluntness loosened a knot in my chest. "Thanks, I'm just looking for some quiet." "Well," she said with a smirk, "you've picked the right place. Just be warned, we've got a wild community festival next weekend. Some people even stay awake past 9. Her dry humor made me laugh, a simple joy I hadn't tasted in weeks. Back at the cottage each night, I checked my old phone and email sparingly. Andrea's messages were piling up, increasingly urgent. "Natalie, please, what happened after you left the restaurant? Mom is saying you abandoned her. Call me." In the local lakeside newspaper, a small snippet announced the sale of my house. Harmless enough, but then something darker spread across the web. On the Lakeside Community News site, I found an article. "Local mother abandoned by daughter after decades of sacrifice." My mother's words leapt off the screen, twisting the truth into a dagger. She told them I had emptied our accounts during a minor disagreement at her birthday, then disappeared without a trace, leaving her destitute and alone. A minor disagreement. Those were her words for publicly banishing me from her life in front of 12 witnesses. My chest burned. My hands shook with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Even miles away, she was weaving her web, presenting herself as the sainted victim, and me as the heartless betrayer. And it didn't stop there. On the Lakeside Community Facebook page, I saw photos. Mom in a hospital bed, frail and tearful. Mom surrounded by flowers, clutching get well cards from Andrea's children. Mom being comforted by her garden club friend. The comments made me want to vomit. After all Catherine did for her, how could Natalie do this? What kind of daughter abandons her elderly mother? No sense of family duty at all. She had controlled the narrative so completely that even strangers were defending her against me. My pulse thundered in my ears. I was ready to slam the laptop shut when a discreet message popped up from someone I did not expect. It was from Dr. Sarah Peterson, my mother's longtime physician. Natalie, I hope you see this. I can't disclose medical specifics, but let me assure you, your mother's condition is stable. It was a panic attack, not a heart attack. She is not in danger. I won't say more, but know this. Take care of yourself. My eyes stung with tears of gratitude. Even in her quiet message, compassion threaded through Sarah's words. She knew. She had seen the truth of Catherine all these years and was subtly telling me not to be fooled. In one swift revelation, everything clicked. The hospital's stay was real, but the crisis wasn't. Mother had faked the narrative, just as Diane's ex-husband had once done. The next morning at Tidal Grounds, Diane slid me my coffee with a sharp glance. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she muttered. I pressed out a humorless laugh. "Family drama, complicated stuff." Diane leaned closer, lowering her voice. 15 years ago, I ran from my ex-husband. He told everyone I abandoned him while he was sick, got people to believe he was the victim. Truth? He was fine enough to manipulate. And if I had gone back when he cried, "Emergency," I'd still be trapped. The hardest thing I ever did wasn't leaving. It was not going back. Her words pierced me deep, like they'd been meant for me all along. If I went back now, what would change? My mother would still be the same woman who wished me gone. The same woman, manipulating an entire town into hating me. The only difference would be this. I'd lose myself all over again. "Thank you," I whispered. Diane shrugged. "Just trust your gut. It knows the truth when your heart doesn't." That night, I made a decision. I would not return, but I would not remain silent either. I called James Hoffman. "Issue a statement. Show them the trust records. The truth needs to breathe." And with that call, another boundary fell into place. For the first time in my life, I wasn't letting my mother define me. Not to the town, not to Andrea, and definitely not to myself. Some wounds never scar until you choose not to bleed for them anymore. This was me, finally choosing to stop. After Diane's wisdom sank in, I knew silence was no longer an option. My mother had poisoned the narrative in Lakeside, framing herself as a helpless victim and me as the villain. If I didn't speak up, her story would become the only truth people ever knew. So I called James Hoffman. "I've seen the fundraiser, the articles. Issue a statement. Show the financial truth," I said firmly. James didn't hesitate. "Of course. We'll release documentation, proving the trust covers every legitimate expense. That alone will strip away the accusation of abandonment." "Good," I said quietly. "And James, tell Andrea I'm safe, that I'm alive. But make it clear, I'm not coming back. She doesn't need to know where I am. All she needs to know is that I am finally living in peace." Once I hung up, I sat at my desk, took out a notebook, and began writing. Not excuses, not self-defense, but the unfiltered record of my life. Page by page, I poured it all out. The birthday dinner, where my mother's truth was nothing short of a weapon. The decades of mind games, criticism, and shifting goalposts. The financial sacrifices I made, year after year, to ensure her well-being. The countless moments where she compared me to Andrea, declaring my failures in the shadow of her pride and joy. 27 pages later, I had a living document, proof of a lifetime of emotional cruelty that could no longer hide behind her polished facade. I scanned it, sent it to James, and instructed him, "If Andrea demands the truth, show her this." It was the first time in my entire life that I had stopped protecting my mother's image. Days later, James called me back. His tone was careful, but steady. "Your sister has been calling me almost daily. She genuinely wants clarity. I shared what you allowed me to. Natalie," she was shocked. 2 days after that, an email from Andrea came through James. The subject line was short and devastating. I had no idea. Her words were raw, unpolished in a way I'd never seen from her. Natalie, I never realized the depth of what you were living with. I knew Mom could be controlling, but I didn't see this. Reading her messages, her cutting remarks, hearing the way she chipped at you, it was so much worse than I ever knew. I am sorry. More than that, I am ashamed that I left you to handle it alone. She admitted she hadn't just been absent. She had, at times, reinforced Mom's favoritism, echoing praise for Andrea's accomplishments that Mom shoved in my face like daggers. I thought I was protecting myself by keeping my distance, but I was abandoning you to bear it all. I can't undo the past, but I want to try to at least face the truth now. For the first time in decades, I felt my sister's words reach me not as the golden child, but as a woman, stripped of her role, talking to me sister to sister. Andrea continued, I showed Mom the trust documents. I told her you hadn't stolen a single dollar, that you ensured everything was provided for her actual needs. At first, she exploded. Then she deflated. Finally, she broke down. Natalie, this may have been the very first time in our lives that she truly felt consequences for her behavior. When I read those words, my hands trembled. Consequences. The one thing my mother had evaded for all 65 years of her life. Andrea's email ended with something I never expected. When you're ready, I'd like to rebuild what we lost. Just you and me. Away from her shadow. Sisters, not competitors. If you still want that, whatever boundaries you set, I will honor them. I owe you that much. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I carried the email to my next therapy session with Dr. Lisa Morgan, the gentle anchor I'd found in Harbor Cove. Dr. Morgan read Andrea's words carefully, then looked at me. This is progress, Natalie, she said softly. How do you feel about it? I swallowed, torn. Part of me believes her. Part of me worries this is just another pull back to the same old role. Me reaching, her walking away. Dr. Morgan's eyes were compassionate, but firm. What would rebuilding your relationship with Andrea look like on your own terms? I thought about it. Distance, at least at first. Clear lines about what I will and won't discuss. An agreement that Mom isn't part of this bridge, not yet. That if Andrea wants something real, it has to exist independent of our mother. My therapist nodded, smiling faintly. That sounds like healthy boundaries. That night, I sent a short reply through James. Andrea, I need more time. I am not ready for calls or visits, but I'll consider limited communication in the future. Please respect my privacy and my choice to remain where I am. Thank you for finally seeing the truth. It was not a door slamming. It was not forgiveness. It was, for the first time in my life, my choice. A week later, as if sensing her narrative was collapsing, my mother did what manipulators often do when all else fails. She tried a softer mask. A letter arrived, through James, her first attempt at direct outreach since the birthday dinner. I'm sorry you felt hurt by my words. I never meant for things to go so far. If I was hard on you, it's only because I wanted the best for you. But look, I've agreed to go to therapy, as the trust requires. Surely this shows how much I want to fix what's between us. I read it 3 times. Not once did she actually admit fault. Not once did she acknowledge the cruelty. It was the most polished non-apology I'd ever seen. Dr. Morgan shook her head when I showed her. Classic, she murmured. She isn't apologizing for what she did. She's apologizing for how you felt. She frames therapy not as her growth, but as her sacrifice for you. It's not change, it's performance. So I crafted my reply with the cold steel of boundaries that had taken me 32 years to forge. I acknowledge your letter. I'm glad you're speaking with a therapist and hope it helps you. At this time, I am focused on my own healing and am not ready for further communication. The trust will continue to provide for your needs as outlined. Brief, factual, detached, and free of hooks. For the first time in my life, the balance had shifted. The mother who had controlled me, defined me, and dismissed me was now bending to rules set by me. And for once, it wasn't anger or guilt I felt. It was liberation, like the tide had finally turned in my favor. Because karma, though slow, does not forget. It just waits for the silence to fall before striking. 6 months passed. 6 months since I had walked away from everything I thought defined me. Harbor Cove had transformed from refuge into home. The little cedar cottage by the bay was no longer just a rental. I had signed the papers. It was mine, purchased not with money, sacrificed for someone else's approval, but with my own. The closing check from my old house, the cash I once saved for dreams long deferred. For the first time in my life, I wasn't floating in someone else's orbit. I was rooted, present, independent. My design work, once muffled beneath my mother's endless demands, flourished. Small local agencies began subcontracting me. A steady stream of clients came through freelancing platforms. Eventually, I hired a virtual assistant to help keep pace, a luxury I never imagined for myself. Creativity, long suffocated under criticism, now spilled freely into websites, campaigns, and art that finally felt like mine. But it wasn't just work thriving. It was me. Harbor Cove became the crucible where I unearthed parts of myself that had been buried. Kayaking at sunrise, hiking with a group of women along windswept cliffs, late evenings with strong coffee and stronger laughter at tidal grounds, where Diane had opened her circle of resilient friends to include me. Margaret, who once fought corporate battles as a lawyer, now ran the town bookstore. Sophia, a retired teacher, painted windswept seas and taught art classes in her beachfront studio. And Lily, widowed young, turned her grief into strength, leading the hiking group with fearless determination. With them, I belonged, not because I earned approval, but because I was. Meanwhile, my connection to Andrea grew steadier. Free of our mother's triangulation, our relationship began to mend. Instead of tense phone calls or obligatory holiday visits, we moved slowly, first cautious emails, then video calls. And with each one, we discovered the sisters we might have been all along if we hadn't been cast as opposites in Catherine's drama. I still can't believe we both devoured the same mystery series as kids. Andrea laughed during one call, and we never even knew it. I laughed back, bittersweet. We were too busy being the roles Mom assigned us, the successful one and the disappointing one. Andrea's voice softened. I'm sorry for never breaking out of that pattern sooner. I think I thought if I stopped playing my part, I'd become the target instead. I shook my head gently. We were both surviving in the only ways we knew. The good part is, we're changing the pattern now. And for once, I meant it. My mother, too, had changed. Or at least, she was trying. The first letter she sent me, months ago, was full of the old, manipulative, non-apology apologies. They weren't acknowledgments of harm, but performances meant to reel me back. But then something shifted. Perhaps it was the therapy sessions she had to attend to access the trust funds. Perhaps it was Andrea pressing her boundaries. Perhaps it was simply life breaking through her polish. Whatever the reason, her letters began to read differently. She wrote about her childhood under her critical parents, a father who demanded perfection, and a mother who offered only conditional affection. For the first time, I saw her not as a villain, but as another product of unhealed wounds. She wrote about my father, tender memories, not dismissive ones. She asked questions about me, my work, my town, my life. And though she would never receive full answers, the curiosity felt genuine. Then finally came a letter unlike any before. Natalie, I have been speaking with Dr. Wilson weekly. For the first time in my life, I see the patterns I carried forward without realizing. The way I treated you was wrong. Not sometimes, not because I wanted the best for you, but consistently, cruelly, unjustifiably. You were the one child who gave me loyalty, the one who stayed, and I repaid you with nothing but criticism. I cannot undo those years, but I am truly sorry. And if nothing else, I want you to know I am proud of you. Proud that you finally did what I never could. Put yourself first. I read it over and over, scanning for the barbs I had grown so skilled at catching. But this letter was different. It wasn't a performance. It was simple, almost shockingly so. It didn't erase years of pain, but it did prove one thing. My decision to leave had been the right one, not just for me, but maybe incredibly for her too. Sometimes, the wound doesn't heal until you force space between you and the one who keeps cutting it. Andrea told me during another call. She's different, Nat. Not perfect, but different. She catches herself before she goes too far. She apologizes when she slips. She even joined a support group for estranged parents. I think she's really trying. Hearing that stirred a kaleidoscope of emotions inside me. Gratitude, bitterness, sadness for all the years lost, hope colored with fear. But most of all, it reminded me of something. Karma doesn't always punish by ruining someone. Sometimes, karma teaches by finally making them face what they've inflicted. As the 1-year mark of my disappearance approached, I reflected on what this year had meant. I hadn't abandoned an elderly parent. I hadn't acted on spite. I had broken a cycle. Yes, guilt still came for me sometime, whispering I was selfish, but its voice grew fainter now, fading beneath the louder voice inside me that said, "No, you survived. You escaped. You rebuilt. Love isn't always staying. Sometimes it's leaving. Boundaries aren't destruction. They're architecture, the walls and doors that make healthier relationships even possible. Forgiveness doesn't require reunion. Healing isn't linear. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is disappear from the noise to finally appear in our own truth. That evening, as the sun dyed the Pacific gold, I walked to my favorite hidden cove, accessible only at low tide. Sitting on driftwood, watching waves explode against cliffs, I whispered the words my reflection once refused to believe. I didn't lose myself. I found her. Back home, under the glow of a single lamp, I wrote one final letter, not to my mother, not to Andrea, to myself. Dear Natalie, you did what seemed impossible. You chose yourself when everything in your world told you not to. You cut ties with a cycle that had strangled 3 generations. You discovered strength in solitude, community in strangers, and love in your own reflection. The journey isn't finished, but you are already further than you ever thought you'd be. And for that, you should be proud. I signed it not as Elaine, not as Natalie, but simply as me. And for the first time, I didn't feel divided between who I was and who I had become, because now finally the two were one. 1 year. It had been exactly 12 months since I slipped my car onto Interstate 80, Lakeside, shrinking in my rear-view mirror. 12 months since my mother's birthday wish became my liberation. Sitting now on the porch of my weathered cottage, overlooking the Pacific, with salt air brushing against my skin and gulls circling above the bay, I could hardly connect the woman I was then, trembling, heartbroken, desperate for approval, with the woman I had become. The shift hadn't been sudden. Healing never is. There were days guilt still ambushed me. Days when the voice from childhood whispered, "You're selfish. You abandoned her." But each time, I held those whispers up against the life I was building, and they grew quieter. Each time I reminded myself, you didn't abandon, you protected, you didn't discard, you preserved yourself. Because love isn't always staying. Sometimes love is leaving, for your own survival. The past year had not erased Catherine. My mother still existed. In Lakeside, in therapy with Dr. Wilson, in the garden club meetings she still led, though with less force than before. According to Andrea, she was softer now, less demanding. Occasionally catching herself before a criticism, sometimes apologizing, awkwardly but sincerely. It was a small miracle of its own. By losing me, she had been forced to see herself, one of the rarest karmic gifts, not ruin, but reckoning. Andrea and I, too, had found one another, not as rivals orbiting our mother's moods, but simply as sisters. Our conversations now were about books, work, children, travel, about life outside of Mom's shadow. I realized only then how much we had lost all those years, how thoroughly Catherine's dynamic had controlled even our bond. Free of it, Andrea was not the untouchable golden child anymore. She was just a woman like me, doing her best, sometimes failing, often longing for connection. And together, we were rebuilding, carefully, authentically. As for me, I was no longer Natalie who stayed. I was Elaine who chose. I owned my cottage. I ran my design business with autonomy. I had friends, not forced or obligatory friendships bound by history, but soul deep ones made in Harbor Cove, on evenings of laughter, coffee, hikes, and shared stories of survival. Most importantly, I had found my own reflection again. The woman who stared back at me now was steady, fierce, smiling not for approval, but because she meant it. On the exact anniversary, I returned to the hidden tidal cove. Low tide revealed the path, just as it had a year before, when I sat on driftwood and let the waves wash away my fear. But this time, I carried a letter, not for my mother, not for Andrea, for myself. Dear Natalie, 1 year ago, you thought leaving made you disappear. What you didn't know was that leaving was how you would finally arrive. You were not selfish. You were brave. You were not cruel. You were courageous. You did not end a family. You ended a cycle. And in doing so, you appeared fully, entirely, and wholly yourself. I tucked the letter into the driftwood crack and watched seawater lap against it, carrying my words toward a horizon painted gold. In that moment, I felt it in my bones. Disappearing had not been my vanishing. It had been my becoming. Catherine once demanded the gift of losing me. What she didn't realize was that in giving her that gift, I gave myself the greatest gift of all, a life built on my own terms. Sometimes the endings we fear most are the beginnings we need most desperately. And with that, a woman who was once defined only by her absence finally became defined by her presence. Natalie had disappeared. Elaine had appeared. And for the first time ever, she was free.